So over the weekend, I checked in with a couple people in the know as far as, the Texans and Deshaun Watson. And the response I got is they are firm on not trading him. That being said, the people I spoke with also understand that could certainly change based on how things play out over the next couple weeks leading up to the NFL draft in April. So the stance is what you're hearing nationally. They're not trading him. Teams have called the Texans. They have said, hey, hang up. We're not trading him. That's been out there. That being said, as I just mentioned, I still think that changes when push comes to shove. I don't think the Texans are going to be able to have the gall, have the guts, the intestinal fortitude to play hardball with Deshaun. I think best case scenario for Nick Caserio is he's able to trade him. He has a 6-year contract. He could then sell ownership on a rebuild and building up the quote-unquote foundation of the roster. We know about the obvious teams for Deshaun, right? We could talk about the Jet offer, and I still maintain the Jets make the most sense for Deshaun as far as an offer. No team has more picks than the Jets over the next couple of years. 4 picks in the first round over the next 2 seasons. 9 picks in the top 3 rounds over the next 2 seasons. 19 total picks over the next 2 drafts. And this is all before a Sam Darnold trade could maybe get the Jets a late 1 or at least a 2nd round pick. So we know about the Jets situation. We know the Dolphins have the 3rd pick in the draft. We know they also have the 15th overall pick in the draft. And we know they, of course, are sitting there with Tua Tagovailoa, who they drafted a year ago, who if the Texans wanted, they could put him in a deal. So still, it comes down to me for the Jets and the Dolphins at this point because of what they have to offer. But the other teams you keep hearing, right? Carolina is aggressive for Deshaun. I don't see the Texans making a deal with the Panthers. They don't have an avenue for the Texans to get back a franchise caliber quarterback. So I rule the Panthers out. I don't see the Niners as a fit for that exact reason. Sure, Deshaun could want to go there, but the Texans don't have to trade him if they're not getting a solution at the quarterback spot. But there are 2 teams that I thought of that I believe the Texans should call if they're going to trade Deshaun. Team 1 is Jacksonville. Now, you might laugh and say, Jake, there's no way they would trade the 1st overall pick. But you have to at least call. You have to at least ask. Maybe Urban Meyer, who has spoken glowingly in the past about Deshaun Watson, actually called him the one that got away. He recruited him hard at Ohio State. He ends up, of course, going with Dabo Swinney and Clemson. Maybe Urban Meyer would want this sure thing in Deshaun Watson. Urban Meyer said on the NFL Network last week, he's nervous about this pick. We have to get it right. Well, how about you get it right by bringing in a guy you already know is great? You already know is a top 5 player. So that's an option. Now, I don't know if Deshaun would want to waive the no trade to go to a team in Jacksonville that's still rebuilding. But if it's, hey, I want to leave the Texans and I'll go anywhere but Houston, then maybe he would if that's the only option. So the Texans, if they're smart, call Jacksonville and just get an idea if that is something they would do. Not saying they would, but we keep talking about the same 4 or 5 teams. Throw Jacksonville in the mix. You have to make the phone call if you're Nick Caserio. And then the other team is Ron Culver's team, the LA Chargers. I'm not saying the Chargers would do it. They probably love Justin Herbert. He had an amazing rookie season, there's no doubt. But you have to at least call and see if they put Herbert in a deal. See, if you're the Texans and you're not going to trade him to the Jets or the Dolphins and get back a top 3 pick where you then could draft your replacement for Deshaun Watson and sell hope to your fans, then you have to call teams with an established quarterback in place and see if a deal could be made. Heck, I'd even call Seattle for Russell Wilson. I doubt it happened, but you have to at least think in those terms if you're the Texans. Like the idea of trading Deshaun Watson to Carolina picking 8th overall or the Niners, picking 12th overall, that's not appealing. Because then when you start talking about future first-round picks being in the deal, guess what? Those first-round picks are going to be in the late 20s. The Niners had Deshaun Watson. You know when they're playing next year? You know where they're playing? They're playing in L.A. in Super Bowl 56. So I just don't see those teams as legitimate landing spots for Watson. I think if he's traded, he has to go somewhere where the Texans then immediately have an answer at quarterback. Otherwise, why trade him? Why trade him to the Panthers or the Niners? Why trade him to the Chicago Bears? What are you doing at quarterback if you're the Texans? And I still think if you're Nick Caserio, you try and do everything in your power to trade him to the Jets. Because then even if you don't like these quarterbacks that are coming out, right, we know about the complications with Justin Fields being David Mulugeta's client, who also represents Deshaun Watson. So that maybe could be a problem if Mulugeta tries to strong-arm the Texans into not drafting Justin Fields. That's a factor that's not being discussed nationally, by the way. Well, then, you know what the Texans could do with that second overall pick? They could trade down to get even more picks. Maybe your selling point to Texans fans is, hey, we screwed up this Watson thing, but Nick Caserio can then say, I wasn't here for that. We're going to get all these picks, and we're going to build this thing up the right way. What if they took the second overall pick and a team like Carolina from 8 comes up to 2? You're getting at least another first-round pick next year. You're already going to have multiple first-round picks next year and the year after from a trade with Deshaun Watson. Maybe you can get some players in that deal. That's what I would do. If you're not sold on one of these quarterbacks, you still try and trade them to number 2 or number 3. 2 makes more sense because you're getting the guaranteed second-best quarterback in the draft. Then you flip them for even more assets. That would be the only way to do it if you're not sold on these quarterbacks. I just don't think a Panther trade or the Niners, well, you got to think about it from a Texan standpoint. Why would they do it? They'd be better off just withholding Watson, allow him to sit out, and then trade him in the offseason next year when his value goes back up. That's what I would do. But it is a complicated situation because we could throw out the Panthers, we could throw out the Bears and the Niners. You have to think in terms of quarterback, which is why if you're Nick Caserio, you got nothing to lose by calling the Chargers, by calling Jacksonville, calling Seattle. How about you call, I don't know, the Cardinals and Kyler Murray? At least he's young. You have to think in terms of that. Because as great as having all these picks are, what does it really mean if you don't have a quarterback? Then you're just the Vikings, where you have a good roster, but you can't win. You're the Kansas City Chiefs with Alex Smith. Good roster, but your quarterback's not good enough to take you over the top. The teams that win Super Bowls in the NFL have elite quarterbacks. There's the outlier Joe Flacco year. Eli did it twice. But those guys rise to the moment in the playoffs. Like the days of Trent Dilfer winning a Super Bowl are long gone. You have to have an elite quarterback. So if you're going to trade Deshaun Watson, the path to getting an elite quarterback needs to be in that deal. Carolina does not give you that path. San Fran does not give you that path. That's why I think if it's not the Jets or Dolphins, let's think about teams that already have an established quarterback in place. Craig Moffitt has written in on Facebook, trade Watson to the Jets for the second overall pick and a bunch of other picks. The Texans then should flip number 2 to the Bengals for the number 5 pick and more picks. They will still wind up with either Fields or Wilson, and Bengals can draft Penei Sewell. Or Penei, I think it's Sewell. I think we're settling on Sewell, by the way. That's an option. I don't know if the Bengals need to move up to number 2 to get him, though. Like, think about how the draft could unfold. Lawrence goes 1, quarterback goes 2, quarterback goes 3. What are the Falcons doing at 4? And I say quarterback at 3 because I can see the Dolphins trading down as well. And if they don't trade down, I see them taking a receiver, right? That could be Jamar Chase. That could be Devontae Smith. The Falcons at 4 is interesting because they could be in on a quarterback. And based on what we know for next year's quarterback class, it is not nearly as stacked as this year's. Although when I hear that, I'm always like, we say this now, but then someone goes out there and has an incredible season. They come out of nowhere and they skyrocket up the draft boards. What was Baker Mayfield before his last year in college? He was a mid-round pick. He ended up being first overall. Who the heck was Joe Burrow before his last year in college? He was the first overall pick when it was all said and done. So we see guys come out of nowhere a lot. But that is the early reports. There's only one guy that has a first-round grade for next year's class, and that is Keaton Slovis, the former USC quarterback who's now at the University of Georgia. So that puts things in perspective. Now, I mentioned the Chargers as a team for Watson. Ron, I want to ask you this. If the Texans called the Chargers and said, hey, we have to trade Deshaun, we'll give you him, but we want Justin Herbert, would you take the deal or would you say no?
No.
And is that because you're loyal to your guy or why is that?
I think a lot of it would be salary-based at this point in time, unless you were taking the salary as well, because we got Justin on a rookie deal for I don't know how long, 3, 4, 5, I don't know. I think it's 3 years or 4 years.
3 more seasons.
And I would much rather have that and go shopping for Justin rather than bringing over Deshaun and just, having all that money just sit with him.
Are you that sold, though, on Herbert being that good?
At this stage, yes. I anticipate there being a sophomore slump. There will definitely be a sophomore slump. There is for everybody. So I'm anticipating a sophomore slump where people have figured him out. But at this point, just based on what we saw, what he did as a rookie against some really good teams, has me excited that I want to just ride this out and see where this goes.
If you're the Texans, you make that call. I agree with Ron. I don't think the Chargers would do it, but that's a call you got to make.